Hey everyone, welcome to the Wellness Project with Des. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm here to talk to you about all things mindset, wellness, and mental health. Today, I am so excited to speak with my guest, Sam Rose. Sam is a 3-time cancer survivor. She's an author and she's currently working on her PhD where she is studying the benefits of creative writing for cancer survivors. Very, very cool. So I'm so excited to talk to Sam today. Let's chat with Sam. Everyone, I'm so excited to talk to Sam Rose today. Thank you so much for joining me, Sam.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sam is a writer, editor, PhD student, podcaster, and 3-time cancer survivor. Wow, that's quite a bit there that you have going on.
Yeah, I like to keep busy.
Yes, you do. First things first. So I know you have a Lynch syndrome diagnosis. What is that exactly?
So Lynch syndrome is something that it's a herited condition that makes a person more likely to get certain types of cancer. There's different types of Lynch syndrome that make you susceptible to getting different types of cancer, but the main ones are bowel cancer, womb cancer, brain cancer in some cases, and it's similar to other syndromes. Other syndromes are available, like BRCA or BRCA, which makes people more susceptible to getting breast cancer because of this genetic condition that they've inherited. So Lynch syndrome is something that I actually inherited from both of my parents. So they both had it. It's called mismatch repair gene. So we all have these genes that help to stop cancer from developing when it starts. But if you have Lynch syndrome, then the genes that help you to do this are a bit broken. When cancer develops, they can't necessarily stop it from happening, and that's why I've been diagnosed with cancer 3 times now.
Wow. And is Lynch syndrome rare? I've actually never heard of it.
It's not actually that rare, but it's rare for people to know that they have it, which is why awareness is so important. So just taking myself as an example, after I had my first cancer diagnosis, they found out I had Lynch syndrome. I had lots of tests which are ongoing, so I'm always under surveillance because they know about the Lynch syndrome and they know about the risk. So it's really quite good that I know that I have Lynch syndrome, because then they can keep an eye on me and they can remove anything that looks like it's gonna start to develop. But yeah, lots of people don't actually know that they have it. So even in some clinical settings, doctors aren't always that familiar with Lynch syndrome.
That's so interesting. Wow. So it's actually very important to know your diagnosis of Lynch syndrome.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow. So you actually got diagnosed with cancer before you found out that you had Lynch syndrome.
Yeah, so I was first diagnosed in 2010 when I was 22, which is really young, isn't it? So
Very young.
because I was so young, and they found these polyps in my bowel, which are kind of little growths, and some of them can be benign and some of them can be cancerous. And I think they found about 18, and during a colonoscopy, and they said that I think maybe just one or maybe two of them were cancerous, but because there was so many polyps and because I was so young, they said, okay, we're going to remove your whole colon. And also they decided to send me for genetic testing because it was unusual, because I was young, to see if there was any underlying hereditary condition there, and that's when they found Lynch syndrome.
Okay. And so you were very young at that time. And then, so you went on to have 2 more cancer diagnoses. How old were you with those diagnoses and what were they?
I was 30, and that was in 2018. So I went for an MRI for a problem that I thought was quite minor, and then the MRI actually showed up abnormalities in the lining of my womb, which is something that's I wasn't even going to be, thinking about, because it was a different problem that I went in for. That was kind of picked up by chance. And then I was also diagnosed with duodenal cancer, and that was from a routine gastroscopy, which I have every year because of the previous cancer and because of the Lynch syndrome. And those 2 diagnoses actually happened within a day of each other. I went to my consultant And he said, yes, you have duodenal cancer. We're going to refer you to another hospital. And then the next day, I had the appointment at the gynecologist, who said, we've found these abnormalities in the womb and it is precancerous and possibly early stage cancer, which I was kind of expecting the duodenal cancer, because when you go to a gastroscopy, they tell you right away if they found something, if they've taken a biopsy, if they're going to send it off. And they said that they found something, they were going to send it off as urgent, which of course doesn't sound great. So I thought, oh,
Right.
maybe they've found something. Yeah, but the womb cancer came as a total shock and was worse in a way, partly because it came like the day after the other
Right.
diagnosis.
Oh my gosh. And so you've had a ton of organs removed due to these cancers. You said your colon was removed, right? And what else has been removed?
So when they took the colon, they also took the appendix. I don't really think there's a medical reason to, other than why not? You don't need it. I guess it reduces risk, and lots of people have them removed anyway. So yeah, colon and appendix that first time. For the womb cancer, I had total hysterectomy. So that was removing the womb, ovaries, because Lynch syndrome comes with a risk of ovarian cancer as well. So might as well take them to reduce the risk, and cervix and so on, which then comes with its own complications of, well, now me and my partner can't have any biological children.
Absolutely.
So that's like
Yeah.
a completely different emotional problem in itself. For the duodenal cancer, I had something called a Whipple surgery, which is often used to treat pancreatic cancer. So that removed the duodenum, which is part of the small bowel, the head of the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the bile duct.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I know I've read some of your writing and you kind of make not light of it, but you make jokes about how you don't know how many organs you have exactly. So I like how you have
Yeah.
this like humor about it. And you said like when you walk, there's like missing parts of you. So I like that you bring out that humor in your writing, which, they always say there's that quote, if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. So
Oh
that's how people,
yeah.
deal with those kind of things. But I've read quite a bit of your writing and it's so good and it's so honest and raw and emotional. And you talk about these devastating things in your life so openly, which I'm sure so many people can appreciate, cancer survivors, especially. But this emotional roller coaster, this emotional toll, I mean, you were so young when you were 22. How did this affect your life and how did you handle all of this? How did you come to terms with all of this?
It was really difficult that first time around. I'm actually finding it emotionally, I'm finding it easier these days. I don't know if that's because I'm basically now doing a PhD study on my own illness, and maybe that gives it some kind of purpose. And then there's all my writing as well. When I first had the diagnosis of colon cancer, I had the surgery. So I had the colon removed. I had a colostomy bag for 5 months. And then after the 5 months, they did what they call a reversal, and they created an internal pouch, which is where you don't need the colostomy bag anymore. They kind of put your insides back together, as it were. And
Wow.
yeah, it's really clever because they create a large intestine out of part of your small intestine.
Oh
So your large
my gosh.
intestine, I know, large intestine usually soaks up like the kind of fluid. So when you have this small intestine kind of acting as a large intestine, it learns to do that. So I am kind of functioning fairly normally, you could say, which is great. So I had that operation in early 2011. Found out about the Lynch syndrome, I think, later in 2011. But it wasn't really until, I guess, that year or the year after that it really kind of hit me emotionally. I think when you're going through something like that, you're focusing on what are the next steps going to be, what next tests are you having, what surgeries are you going to have, what happens next. And then when it's all over, it's like, oh, you don't need chemo in my case, we're just going to do surveillance from now on. You can kind of go back to your normal life. And that's what you expect to happen. And then you're surprised because nobody tells you that actually that isn't really what happens. You don't just shake off the emotional effects of, having a life-changing diagnosis, because that fear is always with you.
It's such a traumatic experience.
And it's quite shocking actually in the research I've been doing for my PhD, just trying to see what a research is saying about cancer as a traumatic experience. It's not really looked at as a traumatic experience very much. I think that people could be talking about it as trauma a lot more and talking about the emotional effects of it. So, some people get PTSD from having cancer. I thought I had PTSD for a while. I mean, I still don't know if I had, but there's definitely some symptoms of post-traumatic stress there, I think, like having nightmares, intrusive memories, that kind of thing. I don't know if you or your listeners have experienced, but if you've had something traumatic happen and a smell or a noise or something can take you right back to a reminder of that situation that you were in. Like if I'm in the office and somebody's using the printer and it's beeping a lot, and the beeping sounds like somebody's morphine machine going on the blink or something like that, so yeah, that can be really intrusive to your daily life and things like that. So sadness that brings from what's happened to you, and then also fear of the future as well, and the fact that you have to have all of these tests. So yeah, it's really emotionally difficult in that way.
Absolutely. I can't even imagine. And how often do you get those tests? You said just, is it once a year, or do you go often for blood tests and things like that?
It's generally once a year. So a blood test once a year, CT scan, gastroscopy is once a year, and also a flexible sigmoidoscopy, which is it's like a colonoscopy, but because it's just for the internal pouch, it's less invasive because it doesn't have to go in quite so far. Yeah, a lot of the stuff around kind of surveillance and bowel cancer in general is really quite graphic, I guess. You
Yeah.
can't really talk
Yes,
about it too much without going into detail.
pretty invasive.
Yeah.
And so, on top of the emotional toll that a cancer diagnosis and, like you said, surviving cancer and going about your trying to go back to your daily life normally, which can be almost impossible for some people, you also have the effects of all of your relationships. Like you said, with your partner, you guys have to come to terms that you can't have children. And then I'm sure your partner and your family have that fear also of a future diagnosis. So, I'm sure it also affects your personal relationships. Can you tell me anything about that in your personal life?
Yeah, it really has lots of different effects. And I think when I was waiting for surgery and going through the tests and the second and the third diagnoses, there was an awful lot of waiting around because I was diagnosed with these two things at the same time. There were these two medical teams talking to each other, saying, okay, what do we tackle first? How do we go about this? What do we do, because it's quite an unusual case, and apparently I became quite famous amongst the doctors and everybody wanted to kind of
I'm
claim
sure
me as
you
their
did.
patient.
I'm sure.
But yeah, during that time was really stressful, just waiting to see what was going to happen. And sometimes people, of course, around you, they care about you, they want to talk to you about it, they want to ask you about what's happening, and that did cause the occasional strain. Not too much, but I think there were probably moments where I was difficult to deal with just because I was maybe a little bit snappy or blunt, just like I don't want to talk about this right now. And I think one of the self-care things for cancer survivors, just to touch on that briefly, I could go into a lot more detail about self-care later as well, but is to really think about who you're going to be talking to, and if they're the right people that you want to confide in, and how many people you talk to as well. Because if you tell a lot of people about your initial diagnosis, then those people are going to come back to you and want updates, and that's going to get tiring.
Mhm.
So I was really quite selective the second time around with how much detail I gave and to how many people. That's one way that relationships were affected a little bit. But I should say that I have an incredibly strong network around me. My partner Peter has been absolutely wonderful, and he's a voice of reason that I often need. I'm very close to my parents as well, and they kind of do the job of updating the rest of the family for me, so I didn't have to deal with things like that.
Oh, that's great. That's great that they took on that task so you didn't have to deal with it.
Yeah. And then in terms of the fertility as well, it hasn't affected mine and Peter's relationship because we've always been on the same page about it. So there was a chance that we would be able to freeze our eggs. We could do IVF treatment and try to conceive that way, or we could hold off on doing surgery, try this other medicine and see if that worked and try to conceive in the meantime and then have the surgery afterwards. But they
Wow.
told
Okay.
us that this other medical option was known to work for people whose cancer was caused by hormones or some kind of hormonal change. But because mine was caused by Lynch syndrome, there's no guarantee that it would work for me. At that point, we both just sort of knew we just want to take as few risks as possible. Peter's always kind of had that frame of mind, so we've always been on the same page in that respect. Even if the relationship there is really strong, there's still like a little bit of guilt that you can carry because you know that you can't give this person something that they wanted, even if they don't make you feel guilty at all or give you any reason to. There's always a little bit of a feeling of guilt there, and as well guilt for my parents for putting them through, even though I can't help it, because I know it sounds illogical, but we do, don't we have guilt over how we make people feel sometimes, even if it's something that we can't control. But generally my relationships have been very strong, bar a couple of friends that I've kind of lost touch with along the way, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think that's so true that I think that's something people don't really talk about a lot with cancer is the guilt that, you can't control your body and that experience and your diagnosis. But like you said, you do feel that guilt of also, I know a lot of people don't want to be a burden to their family or their partner. And, these are people who love and care about you. And I'm sure do not see you as a burden whatsoever. But there's that feeling, that small little voice in our heads that says those kind of things. But that's amazing that you have such a strong network and your partner. Sounds amazing. How long have you guys been together?
I think it's 14 years.
Oh, wow. So you were
Yeah.
together before the first diagnosis and finding out you had Lynch syndrome then?
Yeah, so we got together, we met at university in 2006 when we started uni. So we'd been together about 4 years before that.
Oh, wow. So you went through this whole experience together.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think, in a way, that's kind of helped? Do you think that it would have been different if you had had that first diagnosis and found out you had Lynch syndrome and then were dating other people? Do you think that would have been a different experience for you or harder?
Yeah, I think probably because I do see on social media some cancer survivors in online communities that I look at, they do talk about how difficult it is to date while going through treatment or after treatment. And it's something that must be difficult to talk to somebody new about, because I've experienced that with making new friends after having cancer. And it's something that's such a huge part of you, but it's also very difficult to bring up, especially if it's not something that you're in active treatment for. So if you're meeting people a few years after remission and everything's fine and you're just going through surveillance, I have been in that situation where I found it quite difficult to open up, because I did really want to tell people about that, but also how do you go about just bringing that into a conversation?
Right. And I think a part of it that I wanted to talk to you about too is that when somebody gets a cancer diagnosis or any sort of devastating news, I think other people just don't know what to say. They're nervous. They care about you. They're scared. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't know how to help. Do you think that's any part of why you lost some friendships?
Yeah, because I told one of my friends over text message just really briefly about my second operation I was going to have for the womb cancer, and I didn't get a reply. So I messaged him a little while later, I don't know, it might have been a couple of weeks later, and then he replied to that message and he said, oh sorry, I didn't reply before, just felt really awkward, I didn't know what to say, which in a way I can totally understand. I probably wouldn't know what to say either, but I would really say to somebody, if you're worried about what to say to somebody going through cancer, saying the wrong thing is, I think, still better than saying nothing at all.
Yeah.
And I know that's difficult because there are a lot of things that people don't like to hear, and that does differ as well from person to person. For example, a lot of people don't like the battle language, he lost his battle, she's
Hmm.
fighting cancer. I think because that if you say somebody lost the battle, it kind of makes it sound like if they'd have done something different, then maybe they could have won
Right.
in a way. But then other people really like that language, and they find it empowering. So it really does differ from person to person. I know it's an absolute minefield knowing what to say, but yeah, definitely saying something is better than saying nothing for sure.
I agree. And do you have any advice at all that people could know how to engage with somebody with either a cancer diagnosis or any sort of devastating news that they want to be a sense of support, but they don't know how to be?
Even just saying, I'm really sorry, this sucks, and just being sympathetic or empathetic. Also, a lot of people might say, let me know if there's anything I can do to help, which is a nice and well meant thing to say, but also kind of puts the burden on the other person to find something for this person to do to make them feel useful.
Yes.
So if you want to help, just do the thing, or something practical. So offer to take them to appointments, or bring around food, or send care packages, something practical or something kind. Surprises. I got a couple of surprises in the post during the second time from my girlfriends, and absolutely loved it. Just to know that somebody is thinking about you as well, and just check in with people and just see how they're doing. And don't worry if they say they don't want to talk about it, or even if they don't respond, especially if they're going through treatment or if they've been through surgery. Because after my last surgery for the Whipple, I couldn't even pick up my phone to reply to people's text messages because it was just too much effort.
Right. And I think that's important too, to understand for friends and family, because I think the media movies do us a disservice, because there's always these movies, right, about someone going through cancer, and it's always so inspiring and it's sad but uplifting, and you never see this person in a dark light. And like how you said earlier, is, you would feel guilty for like snapping at someone or not being in the best mood. And I think people need to understand too that, first of all, you're going through a traumatic time. You're going through this experience that like a lot of people can't even understand. Like you're not going to be in a good mood. You're probably not going to want to be chatty, and like you said, it depends on the person, but I think that people need to have more grace with somebody going through these kind of things. And I think it's so easy for people to get defensive, and like you said, you wouldn't even have the energy to lift your hands to answer a text. And I think a lot of people might think, oh, she didn't answer me, she must be mad at me, or I said the wrong thing, or and take it personally when you don't know what that person's going through. It's so exhausting, and not only physically but emotionally too, and overwhelming. And you have a lot of people checking in with you and feel like you have to reply to all of them, like you said, with your family and your parents relaying those messages. But then you also have those people not checking in with you. It's just a lot emotionally and physically to deal with. And I think that people on the outside that want to be supportive might almost feel paranoid or defensive and not understand that, you might be in a bad mood. You may get up and feel depressed, and you are going through a traumatic experience. So I think it's important that everybody gives themselves grace, as well as the person going through this experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say as well, to be helpful, to just not give the person anything else to worry about. For example, if you're still working, my colleagues at work were just really great about everything, and I knew that I didn't have anything to worry about at work. I knew that I was off work for 5 months for my hysterectomy and my Whipple surgery, and the company paid me in full, which was just the best thing that they could have done. All my colleagues knew about all of it because I told them, and yeah, I've put a dedication and acknowledgement to them in the back of my book, just to say, thanks for making life at work as easy as possible while everything else is happening, because
Wow.
it's one of the most difficult things, I think, is trying to juggle your normal world and the medical world, and feeling like you have to be completely present still at work and with friends and everything else that's still happening around you, because the world is turning as normal, but then also going to these medical appointments and trying to fit them around your job and thinking about these two things. And I think one of the emotional difficulties is when you're really in your normal life headspace and then you get a phone call from the hospital saying it's time to book in for your gastroscopy, for example, or you get a letter through the door and suddenly that medical world is saying, hey, get back here, you're wanted in this other world as well. It's really hard to switch between the two and to exist in both of those.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I like how you said that the normal world is kind of going, it's spinning, it's going on as normal, but your world's it kind of stopped. That is a big conflict between the two worlds, definitely. So that's so incredibly nice that your job did that. I mean, I feel like every job should do that, but it's sad that that is so rare and so special, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It should just be the norm. So I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about your PhD. And you are studying the ways that creative writing can benefit cancer survivors. Is that right?
Yeah, so I started my PhD last year, so I'm just sort of towards the beginning of my second year now, really enjoying it. So yeah, I'm studying how creative writing can benefit cancer survivors when dealing with these emotional issues. And it's a practice-led study, which means that 70% of it is my own creative work. And then it's what we call an autoethnography, which means that I'm kind of doing like a documentary on myself, which is quite cool
Okay. Oh,
because
wow.
I am my favourite subject. So it's a bit unusual perhaps because it's not something that involves participants or experiments in the way that you might think that PhD research normally would. So yeah, it's a lot of writing my own creative work and processing different emotions and trying to see what different techniques for writing work for me, and reading a lot of other people's illness poetry. And then by the end of my PhD, I should have a collection of work, which I think at the moment is going to be partly poetry and partly personal essays or creative non-fiction. So yeah, I've been experimenting a lot with different forms of writing and things. And yeah, it's been really good so far.
That's incredible. So I know you are a published author. You have your memoir as well. So what came first, the writing or the cancer diagnoses?
Writing. I've been writing ever since I can remember. I think before I could pick up a pen, I was probably writing stories in my head.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just always been there. So yeah, when cancer came along, it was natural really to write about it.
When did you start writing your memoir?
I started the memoir in spring of 2019, so after I had recovered from the Whipple and the hysterectomy, and so I was just kind of easing back into work part-time and getting back to normal at that point. And I wrote it in, I think I wrote the first draft in 21 days.
Wow.
Yeah. I was really keen to get that first draft just done.
Wow. And I mean, I'm sure after all that, you've had a whole lot to say too.
Yeah.
Wow. So, what gave you the idea to start a memoir?
I wanted to write something big about my experiences for a while. And initially, I wanted to write some kind of guide to Lynch syndrome because I saw that there weren't really any books out about it at the time. I think there are a few more now. I think it's still something that isn't covered very much in literature, at least not for the general reader, probably more for medical practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like writing about Lynch syndrome, it was initially going to be very factual. It was going to cover a lot of things that didn't really apply to me because I wanted to provide a guide for kind of everybody impacted by it, which would mean that I'd have to do a lot of research around it. And I don't really like doing research around Lynch syndrome because it's scary to
Mm-hmm.
think that something could be going on in your body and you don't know, and this syndrome means that it could happen again. It doesn't really bear thinking about too or examining too closely. I kind of got rid of that idea. I don't really know what drove me to start the memoir in particular at the time. It's just something that, yeah, that just kind of came about. But it was a very hard thing to write still, because it was going back through all of these things that had happened. Yeah, it was emotionally difficult, which is probably why I wanted to finish the first draft so quickly, but
Mm-hmm.
also why it's taken then the best part of 2 years to get to this point of actually publishing it.
And it just came out, right?
Yep, it just came out.
I can't wait to read it. I read the first part on Amazon. I'm going to order it this week. I can't wait to read it because I really loved the first part that I read. I just, like I said before, I love how honest you are and vulnerable. So, yeah, I'm sure that writing process was pretty difficult.
Thank you. Yeah, it is difficult, but really helpful as well in a way. Something that I'm finding through my PhD research is that other studies have found that if you write narratively, so if you write in a chronological order, beginning to end, this happened, then this is how I felt, etc., it can really help to organize your thoughts, and it can potentially also help to reduce those intrusive thoughts, because you're
Mm.
thinking about things more consciously, then you're potentially less likely to have these intrusive thoughts when you don't want them. And also the book is quite helpful for me just thinking, oh, I can't remember when this happened, or I can't remember what order these events came in. I can just look at my book. I haven't had to do it yet, but it could just be useful for me later on, just to jog the memory if I need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a little time capsule for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Somebody asked me if the book felt like closure for me. And I said, not really, because, things are still always going to be ongoing because of the previous diagnoses and the Lynch syndrome. There's always going to be tests and things to do. But at the same time, it does feel, as you say, like a time capsule. It feels like I've kind of boxed it up and put it in a little compartment. And even though there's going to be more to come, I don't know, it just feels really neat and tidy to have it all packaged up in this book.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. So your PhD is on the benefits that creative writing can have for cancer survivors. Do you think that the benefits are also helpful for people going through their cancer diagnosis at that time? Is there a difference between the survivors versus the people going through it?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I would say that for me, the emotional effects of cancer came after the diagnosis and surgery and all of that stuff. I don't think I
Mhm.
really started writing about cancer until after my first surgery, so probably in 2011. So yeah, I can't really speak to whether it would be helpful for people going through treatment, but I did write through treatment the second time. I did write quite a lot during 2018. As with everything, it's going to be helpful for some people and less so with others, depending on all sorts of things, like if people have other mental health problems, for example, or if you're writing a lot anyway compared to somebody who doesn't normally write or isn't normally very open or talks about their feelings. I'm not really sure exactly how it can affect things, but absolutely it really does differ from person to person depending on your experience.
Right, right. Okay. And can you give some examples of how someone with a cancer diagnosis can practice self-care during treatment as well as after?
Yes, so I actually have a whole chapter in my book dedicated to self-care for cancer survivors. So I've mentioned finding the right people to talk to. I would also say the internet is your friend and it's also your enemy. So
Right.
so it's your friend in that there are so many cancer communities, especially for adolescent and young adult cancer survivors. So, for example, Stupid Cancer, Elephants and Tea, Grit, that's GRYT, ihadcancer.com are all really good resources to find like-minded people. Some of them do webinars and things like that, online conferences, and you can guest blog for them if writing is something that you're interested in. So yeah, so the internet can really be helpful in that way, in finding your people. but it can also be really scary if you try Googling stuff.
Yes.
As we all probably know, even if you're not a cancer survivor, if you've Googled the most minor of symptoms, you've probably found, oh my God, I'm going to die or
Yes.
something. I have a cold. Oh no, it's all over.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Not really great to be Googling too much. Peter often Googles things for me if I need them Googling, often without asking, just because he likes to be in the loop and understand what's happening. So he's a really good buffer for me in that way. So I can just ask him and he will give me a more diluted and rational response than Google would.
That's great. That's a great idea. During your experience with your diagnosis, the two different times, what helped you emotionally during your treatments and your surgeries and everything?
Definitely the people around me. So, of course, definitely Peter, as we've mentioned. Some of the nicest memories I've had of 2018 were just going to the pub with my friend and either really talking it out or just being distracted by something else was really helpful, and just being grateful for all the small things and looking forward to small things, even if it's just, oh, my favorite TV show's on tonight or something. Just any kind of distraction is really useful. And I like to think that I would do things slightly better if there was a next time, because we were talking about balancing two different worlds. I like to think that I've learnt now that I don't have to be so present in the normal world if that's too difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably easy for me to say now, but yeah, just giving yourself more of a break, I think, and realizing that you don't have to do all of the normal things that you would do, and you don't have to do them with a smile on your face. You can just admit everything is rubbish. Yeah, and just try to take care of yourself in that way.
Definitely. Definitely. And all that stuff will be there when you finish your experience and you survive the diagnosis. I mean, all that stuff's going to be there. Work is going to be there. The chores are going to be there. The pub is going to be there. Everything will be there. But I think it's so important to take care of yourself during that time. And like you said, lean on the people that are there to support you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think people get caught up in all the things they need to do. And like you said, trying to balance the two worlds and like, well, I have to worry about work. But you know what? There are things that are more important than work. So,
Yeah, just sit down, just curl up under a blanket and just switch the rest of the world off for a while. Don't worry about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So, you also have another book, right? Empower Thee. That's a collection of poems about being a cancer survivor.
Yeah, so I wrote those and self-published this book. I think it was in 2015 that one was published, so a little while ago. I was reading it the other day because I decided to do a reading of it on my podcast. It really took me back to that time and made me see, all of these poems were along the theme of cancer survivorship and the emotional issues that I was dealing with then. Because between say 2012 to 2013ish, I was really at my peak of dealing with that, I think. And I would be at home, I would be writing, I would probably have a drink with me, and that would just be my routine to really just get things out. And when I was reading back that collection, I could really see and remember the place that I was in at that time. And I think I've come a long way from that, actually, because as I said earlier, I don't really feel like I'm there anymore. It has been a different experience emotionally the second time. But yeah, I'm still really proud of those poems, and I do hope that they are empathetic for other people that are in similar situations.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And you write so much. I mean, you have so much writing on your website and you also have your podcast. I mean, you have so much great content for cancer survivors and those struggling with Lynch syndrome. So that's really great. And your podcast is fairly new, right?
It is, yeah. I launched it at the beginning of this year. So it's called Speaking Cat, and it came off my literary magazine, which is Peking Cat Poetry. So Peking Cat, Speaking Cat.
I love that.
Sometimes it's just me talking away. Sometimes I'll be talking about things that I've read recently to do with my PhD research, or sometimes I'll be reading my own work, and sometimes I'll be interviewing other writers as well.
Okay, great. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I'm going to listen to some of your episodes. You have, I think it's 7 out right now, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I can't wait to listen to them. And like I said, I can't wait to order your book. I'm definitely going to order that this week. And I recommend everyone does that as well. This experience has gone on for years for you. I mean, that's what going on a decade.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
It's a long time. That's a long time. And I mean, yeah, I'm sure you've grown a lot and you were so young at your first diagnosis. So, I mean, does that feel like it was a long time ago? Does it feel like it was another lifetime or does it feel like it just happened?
It feels like a really long time ago. And I remember when I had my reversal and we were packing away all of the colostomy bags and kind of accessories that go with that to take them to the hospital for somebody else to use. And it had been maybe a week or two after my reversal. And already just looking at all of those bags and other things, I was just like, wow, this already feels like it was about 20 years ago that I needed to use these colostomy bags.
Wow. Wow.
But it does make you think, though, what kind of person would you be if it hadn't happened to you, and how has it affected you as a person, and are you the same person as you were back then? And that's really something that I've been thinking about more recently, is if I miss the person that I used to be, and exactly what has changed, because you're in fight or flight mode so much, even when you're not in treatment, because you're still waiting for tests and the results of the tests and all this sort of stuff. It does
Right.
make you think, am I just a cancer patient all of the time now? Who am I?
Yeah,
It really makes you think
absolutely.
about your identity.
Oh, absolutely. That's so philosophical. And then I saw on your website also that you are Buddhist. Like I asked before with the writing, did the Buddhism come first or did the cancer diagnosis come first?
Buddhism came first. I actually read a really great book recently, which is called How to Be Sick, and it's by Toni Bernard, who's a Buddhist, and she has a chronic illness. And that book is just full of so many really useful thoughts and tips for kind of getting yourself through your health anxieties and things like that. It's something that when my worries come around again, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to lean on that some more as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, because I know when something big like that happens, when somebody gets sick or they get diagnosed or somebody passes away, just anything that just doesn't seem fair in life, it can cause these philosophical and religious battles of, who am I? Why is this happening to me? So, along with the physical issues, the emotional toll, I mean, there's also this philosophical and religious kind of battle in your mind, also. So, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to look into that book also, and I'm going to link everything in the show notes. Where can everybody find you?
So I have a website, which is writersam.co.uk. I also spend a lot of time on Twitter, which is writersamr. And my book is Gut Feelings, Coping with Cancer and Living with Lynch Syndrome. And that's on Amazon on paperback and Kindle.
Awesome. Awesome. Sam, thank you so much for talking with me today. I appreciate so much you being vulnerable and open and just honest about your feelings and your experience. I think that my listeners are going to appreciate that so much and really resonate, even if they haven't been diagnosed with cancer. I'm sure, everybody knows somebody that has been, and I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of people and be helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really appreciate any opportunity people give me on their platform. And if anybody does want to get in touch with me to talk about any of these issues, my email address is writer.sam@outlook.com. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Sam, for joining me today. That was an incredible interview. I loved speaking with you about your experience, and I loved how honest and open you were and how raw you talk about your experience. I really, really appreciate it. And I know my listeners will as well. If you want to check out Sam, I'm going to link everything in the show notes. Definitely go to her website and check out her 2 books. So the one she just released is called Gut Feelings: Coping with Cancer and Living with Lynch Syndrome. And you could get that on Amazon. I'm going to link that in the show notes as well. And her other poetry book is Empower Thee. And it's all about empowerment and empathy. And the poems are about her experiences as a cancer survivor and living with Lynch syndrome. So definitely check those out and check out her podcast as well. I'm going to link everything in the show notes, and I will be ordering her book this week. I can't wait to read it. Like I said in the interview, I read the first part of it on Amazon and I couldn't stop reading. And then the preview ended, and I was like, no. So I definitely have to order that today. I'm very excited to read that. I could have talked to Sam all day. I loved speaking with her. So, reading her book and her blogs and listening to her podcast is going to be awesome because I could keep hearing from her, which is great. And her blog, which we didn't mention on the podcast, but oh my gosh, her blog is actually a winner of the IHadCancer.com Best Cancer Blog Award. She was the winner in 2016 and she was a runner up in 2017. So that's really, really cool. So awesome. Congratulations on that, Sam. That's so cool. Keep writing, keep doing what you're doing because I know you're helping so many people. And I absolutely love that. Thank you for tuning in. And I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Until next time.